So good afternoon. What a pleasure to be with all of you. I want to give you a warning here because you're going to see a much different presentation from me than Rachel, of course, because I'm about 45 years older than she is. But what I thought I'd do is just share a few reflections. I'm glad you referenced Dick because I met Dick probably at the very early stage of starting my servant leadership journey. I was encouraged to join the board of the Boy Scouts, where I met Dick. He was in a leadership role way back when. This is the early 90s, to put this into context. And it was about the time I began to be more active in my volunteer leadership roles. And I was very fortunate. I want to talk a little bit about the role models I had, the organizations I worked with, because they had helped me shape and define the servant leadership journey that I've had along the way. So just a really quick background, because these roles were instrumental in what I learned. So I graduated from Marquette in the late 70s. I spent the first 23 plus years of my career at Arthur Andersen. That's now a firm for your history books for you young people. But at the time, it was a predominant accounting consulting firm in Milwaukee. We had a bit of an episode, if you might remember what happened at the Andersen firm, and that really was a shapeful one for me as I led all of our team at Andersen on to the rest of our careers at Deloitte. We'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later on. I then kind of jumped into chapter 2 of my career, maybe you call it chapter 3, when I became the dean of the business school at Marquette. I met my good friend John Knapp there, and it was inspired. I was retired at the time, and I think there's not a chance I'd take a job like that unless I didn't have a servant leadership gene somewhere in my system. So I'll talk a little bit about that and the experiences I had there. And maybe what you can do is just learn a little bit from some of the experiences I've had, because a lot of it was shaped by role models. I don't really have to define servant leadership. I've been talking about this for almost 20 years before I knew it was a thing. I didn't know about the book until I read the book. But I think the people that I worked for showed me by example. They didn't tell me what a servant leader was. That's just how they operated. And every single role I took, that was the philosophy I had. And by focusing on someone else and not yourself, totally focus on the people that you lead and not yourself, you'd be amazed how successful you could be. And so I started that model behavior at Andersen. I took it to my roles at Deloitte. I took it to Marquette. And today I'm still involved, as I was telling Dick, in a half a dozen different organizations and try to bring that same sort of focus. These are just a few things that I think are the primary characteristics of servant leaders. I've become a little bit of a student of leadership. I've also become a student of followership. I've really watched who follows people. And by the way, I also watch what leaders don't have followership. So I'd encourage you to think about that and think about the people that you look up to and watch how people love to work for them and the things that they'll do, because the people that people love to work for are more focused on you than they are them. They're more focused on making you successful than making them successful. It's a super simple formula. And I think there's one thing, and I've watched so many different leaders, so many of them good and some not so good. But I think a couple of these characteristics that jump out to me the most is one, putting yourself in someone else's shoes. It seems so simple when you sit across the desk from a young rising leader in your organization, or when I was at Marquette, a professor who was struggling, or I had a client in a difficult situation, all these different parts of my career. If you just for a minute put yourself in their shoes, and you think about next steps you'd take, you'd be amazed that different mindset changes just about everything. And I think that's about being authentic. I think I was really lucky, Rachel, all these many different roles I had, and I was lucky to have lots of leadership roles in my different career, but I never had to change who I was. I never had to act smarter. I never had to act more demonstrative. I just kept the same sort of approach, and it always seemed to work. And so now, after 45 years, I think I have a formula, so I'm not planning to change it now. So I think, again, I come to you today with a pretty big variety of things I've done. I have a good 40 years in business at two of the best accounting consulting firms in the world. And this kind of approach of being a servant leader absolutely builds trust in the people that work for you and the clients that you serve and the clients that you hope to serve. It's incredibly simple. And if you have that putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, and incredible humility in everything you do. That absolutely comes through. I didn't expect to have a tenure in higher education. I spent 4.5 years at Marquette and now another 2 years in this part-time role. And I think that kind of approach works exactly the same sort of way as I'm now interacting. When I was the dean, I was interacting with professors, interacting with students, interacting with companies, interacting with donors. And that same sort of approach, it just builds the kind of connectivity that you're hoping for, and building stakeholder engagement with that sort of approach. Today, I do a lot of my work in the not-for-profit area. Dick's been a real role model for me. Dick, I've talked to a lot of different groups about what you're still doing today. And I hope in a handful of other years, I'm still as active as you are, right, in these kind of ways. And I think this encouragement, by the way, when I first took a position in the Boy Scout board, I wasn't an experienced Boy Scout. I wasn't an Eagle Scout, but I was encouraged to give back by my firm, by the Parkers, that thought this would be really good for me, and not just good for me and not good for business development, be really good for the Milwaukee community. And sitting here today, I've been on 12 or 13 charitable boards. I still serve on a couple. I've been serving one. I served the Archdiocese for about 25 straight years, and last year, the Archbishop Listecki said, Jim, you served us for 25 years. Here's a trinket, and thank you for your service. It was a really nice trinket. And then 1 week later, someone else from the Archdiocese called me and said, hey, we got this new inner city school system. It's called Seton, and you'd be an ideal board member. And so I said, yes, that's what you do. So let me just talk a little bit. I know we just got a couple of more minutes to talk about some of these experiences, but one of the more seminal moments I had in my career is I was managing 600 people in the Arthur Anderson Milwaukee office. And on March 15, 2002, the Department of Justice indicted the Anderson firm for a felony. You may not remember this, but in one day it took the entire firm down. And in one day, 600 people in our office had an incredibly uncertain future as to where they would work, what they would do, would they have to move. Were my partners and I going to be possibly held personally bankrupt? Clint was in our firm at that time. He went, we're never some of this. And so I learned a lot that day about how people view leaders in times like that. And so it wasn't just me, I was the managing partner, but our entire focus was helping all these 600 young people, assure them that they would find a great job next. And that was our goal, and we had to decide this pretty quickly, and within about 30 days, we mostly chose Deloitte. A few others took paths elsewhere. But one of the things I really learned at that time, and had lots of guidance from more senior partners than me, is that when really difficult things happen, everybody watches the leader. Everybody watches the leader, never underestimate that. And so what I did in times, I think you were talking about all the challenges in healthcare, in times of challenge and uncertainty, it's incredibly important you communicate, and you over-communicate, and you over-communicate again. And we were so lucky, maybe, that because we got good advice, we made a great decision. Deloitte became an amazing firm, and I was lucky to have a terrific career after that. I came to Marquette, as I told you, as I told some of the people at the table, I wasn't planning a second career. Bought a home in Florida. I promised my wife I'd finally spend time with her. And we had an incredible tragedy. Many of you might remember what happened. My predecessor, the dean of the college, was killed in a terrible car accident. And about a week later, someone asked me if I might give them a year of my time to become the dean of the business school. And it was a no hesitation, yes, because I think by then, this whole servant leadership was in my DNA. And what I've been trying to do since then, and now I guess if I'm in chapter 3, I'm still trying to do the same thing. That's why I'm so fortunate that Dick's inviting me to come speak at this event so I could share some of these experiences. I would say to all of you, think about your role models, and then think yourself about being a role model. Tom, you and I were talking about this. As I learned from younger people, now I'm not so young anymore. Now I think my job is to help people like Rachel and others how to find their way. I had a conversation with a young recent graduate just yesterday who I never met, and she was having a hard time finding her first job. So someone suggested she might talk to me, so I took a call with it. I think that's what gets into your DNA after a while. So that's just a little bit of my story. You can tell those slides and you have some cool pictures. That's Miss Rachel. I love this quote because I think this defines what it really is to be a servant leader. So thank you so much for having me today. I look forward to being on annual meeting rounds.